Today, I have the pleasure to talk with Dr. DeGeest, Assistant Professor of Organizational Behavior and Human Resource Management at the School of Business and Economics of the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. He's one of the authors of the paper, The Duality of Boundary Spanning, Its Positive and Negative Effects on Team Effectiveness. The Academy of Management, Organizational Behavior Division's outstanding paper with practical implications for management award. Dr. Congratulations on the award.
Oh, thank you very much. It's an honor to receive this award, and my team and I are very happy about it.
We would like to ask a question about the paper to get some insights about the study that you conducted and the implications that can be derived from your findings.
Absolutely.
You have a paper that, contrary to what most research on team boundary spanning suggests, boundary spanning is not always good for teams. It can have negative consequences. When and why is boundary spanning negative for teams, and for what outcomes?
Sure. So boundary spanning is the idea of external coordination, or trying to get resources from outside of your team into your team. The vast majority of research, there's been 2 big reviews that have been done, show that typically team boundary spanning has a positive relationship with teams. But a lot of that research has focused on certain types of teams or certain types of organizations where there aren't very many potential downsides to boundary spanning. So we tried to conduct our study in a new context where we believed that we would see both positive and negative benefits there was a potential for both positive and negative benefits of boundary. But it's really interesting to think about, because even the earliest literature about boundary spanning talks about this idea of teams engaging in too much boundary spanning and becoming underbounded teams. So teams spend so much time sort of outside of their team that they don't take care of the essential task work that they need to take care of that. But the research hasn't been very good about finding sort of theoretical rationale that might occur, or finding good theoretical paradigms for what process why these effects might emerge. So what we did was take this theory called team resource allocation theory, which says that teams only have a limited amount of time and attention to focus on different activities. So time on boundary spanning is time that they don't have for the essential team activities. And so we tried to focus on, what are some conditions that change the relative utility of boundary spanning and make it negative for these teams? We focused on 2 aspects. One thing we focused on is the level of external interdependence for these teams. So how much do these teams have to coordinate with other outside team members to face sort of shared resource constraints? The second thing we focused on are sort of internal regulatory processes in these teams. And we focused on team monitoring. Team monitoring is a construct that talks about how well teams can make sort of engage adjustment and how aware they are of what other members of the team are doing and the resources that their other team members need. So we focused on boundaries. We focused on team monitoring because it speaks directly to this question about being able to engage in adjustment and being aware of what's going on inside the team. And we thought that was a really nice sort of theoretical connection, because when we talk about the definition of boundary spanning, there's this component of being able to direct real-time mutual adjustment, or this ability to sort of look at what your other team members do, adjust what you're doing. So this component of adjustment was in both of these definitions, and we thought that was a really nice sort of theoretical link between these 2 constructs.
Well, thank you so much. So what can teams do to maximize the effect, the benefits of boundary spanning, or at least potential downsides?
Right. So the big thing that our moderators work for both team performance, team withdrawal behaviors. Team turn. Good Lord! I can't remember what the second outcome is. This is really embarrassing. We looked at both we looked at an external rating of team performance. We also looked at team members' internal rating, the team viability, how willing team members were to continue to be a part of the team. And what we generally found was that when external interdependence is high, when teams have a lot of shared resource constraints with their teams, they should engage in boundary spanning. When external interdependence is low, there's a strong negative effect for both. Similarly, when teams have a high level of monitoring, when they're aware of what's going on with their other team members, they're much more able to use boundary spanning effectively, and that team monitoring ensures that there's a positive relationship between team performance, between boundary spanning with team performance and with team viability.
I see.
So if I were trying to translate this directly in terms of practical implications, I would say managers need to look and say, okay, well, how much do we really need these teams to be operating and sharing information in teams? Sometimes it's something you really want teams to do. Like if you're looking at our teams, we typically have seen a lot of research about boundary spanning has been in this R&D sector. Boundary spanning typically is a good idea because lots of those teams can sort of share information and ideas in a productive way. But what we see is that when external interdependencies are low, you're sort of using up valuable time and resources for these other teams. If all of the teams in your group, like sales teams, they can't really share information very well, then there's not necessarily a really good reason for them to engage in a lot of boundary spanning activity, and that actually hurts their performance. The other big piece of practical advice we have is about monitoring. So if your teams are engaging in boundary spanning, make sure they're aware of what other team members are doing and what other team members want and need. The big thing that we sort of hypothesize and talk about is that when teams aren't aware of what resources are in the team, they engage in spanning and they gather useless or redundant resources. And you can sort of think about a practical example of that, right? So if I think that my teammate Mary really needs to know information about a certain topic or a certain sort of piece to do her part of the work on our team project, and I go and spend a couple of hours trying to get that information outside of the team, but I don't know that our other teammate, Alice, has that information already inside the team, that's a problem, right? I just used up several hours of my time, can't get it back. And so that's sort of the argument that we make. When you're aware of what's going on inside the team, when you're aware, you can make your adjustments you can make the adjustments that you engage via boundary spanning that much more efficacious.
I know that you conduct study in an healthcare organization. You note in the paper that your setting is kind of unique in the literature on team boundary spanning. What makes it so different? The fact that boundary spanning can have both positive and negative consequences?
Yeah, there are a couple of different ways in which our study is relatively unique. There is a review of the multi-team systems literature, which talks a lot about boundary spanning or how teams coordinate with each other, and they did a sub-review of a lot of the research about healthcare and healthcare organizations. And a lot of that research happens at sort of a higher level of analysis, how different hospitals coordinate with each other, or how different departments in different hospitals share information about patients. Our study was a little bit different because we were looking at addiction, and we were really looking at sort of the lowest level of action teams. So looking at these sort of that took on different caseloads and had to sort of help these clients deal with their addiction processes. So in that sense, and one of the things that was really useful about that was that there was a lot of variation across these teams in terms of the actual level of external interdependence. So some cases that these teams had to deal with were relatively straightforward. They didn't require a lot of sort of interdepartmental care. But then cases where you had maybe a person dealing with an addiction, but they also had some criminal issues, they also had some family and foster care issues, and so all of a sudden you need to have a doctor, you need to have a psychologist, you need to have a family therapist, you need to have a social worker, different expertise areas weighing in on this, and that dramatically increases the need for boundary spanning teams. So we had a really nice setting in the sense that there was a lot in these teams for interdependence. A lot of ways in which these teams had relatively limited time and resources, right? These weren't necessarily, there was a lot of sort of time-dependent work that they had to do, and there was a lot of ways in which we thought that you really could see that you spend an hour wasting time or using up time on a non-essential function, that's the rest of the time that you have for these relatively in-demand workers.
In the paper, you focused on the moderating effects of to factor on team interdependence, resource interdependence, and team monitoring. Do you think that there might be other factors beyond the ones that you studied that might affect the effects of boundary for teams?
Yes. I mean, we wanted to focus on this idea of there's this core issue in the literature of this idea of underbounded teams, good theory to predict when and how that occurs. So we wanted to use resource allocation theory to make more robust theoretical predictions about when negative effects occur. But resource allocation theory is a very, very broad. You can apply it to lots of different kinds of theories and ideas and constructs. And so what we said, and so we talk about this in our paper in the discussion section, and basically point out that one of our hopes for this paper is that more folks can sort of, more researchers can take of thinking about when negative effects could occur and then start applying our core logic of resource allocation and constructs to think about when and how negative effects might occur. I don't want to. One of the things that we've been talking about is that we focus specifically on team monitoring, but another contender and one construct we had initially thought about are team mental models of how teams represent information internally. That seems like a really fruitful research. I think the paper focused pretty squarely on team performance and viability, but there are lots of other outcomes for teams. And so if you start talking about other outcomes for teams, all of a sudden you will have a very different sort of sectors that you might be interested in studying or looking at. So, I mean, we didn't really look at, when we're talking about R&D teams, one of the things that's really important is creativity. And there isn't a lot of argument for that in the same way in our particular sample. But if you're talking about that relationship between planning and innovation, you might focus on a completely different rating construct.
Well, Dr. DeGeest sharing this with us, speaking with us today. It's very interesting, and I enjoy very much you about your paper and some insights. And congratulations again to you and yours for this big achievement. And see you at the annual meeting in Anaheim.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Patricia. We read it. I also want to thank my co-authors, Carmen van der Vegt and Tom Vries, for contributing and being a part of this project. Really great. So thank you very much. We're all very grateful to the Academy for receiving this award.
Thank you again. Bye.
All right. Thank you.